Hello, Janice.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great, and you?
Very well.
Janice, should snowboards or snowboards
Snowboards.
should snowbirds rent or buy their second home? How would they decide?
I think that is a very interesting topic that we should talk about.
Okay, so first, what is a snowbird? Could you give a quick definition of that?
Absolutely. See, funny story about this whole topic is I'm from Florida. Spent the first half of my life there and I moved to Pennsylvania. And now I would like to be a snowbird. So I have come full circle to snowbirds. What is it? It is someone who spends their winter in the warmer part, let's say Pennsylvania. In the summer, it's warm. So we stay here. In the winter, it's cold, it's dreary, it's gross. We don't want to be here. So we go to Florida where we become snowbirds.
And
Makes
there's a lot of
sense?
reasons. It's not just about distaste for the weather, but some people, as they get older, sometimes the dryness of the winter is just like intolerable. So there are many reasons.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And let's face it, I mean, the winter in Florida compared to the winter up in the Northeast, it's just much more tolerable.
Janice, would you agree that this topic is for maybe our more well-to-do client or listeners? Because if you have the luxury of thinking about renting or buying a second home, you're probably doing pretty well. Would you agree?
I would agree, yes. Maybe well-to-do, maybe a little farther along in life.
Right. Right. With more accumulation of wealth, maybe, whatever
Yeah,
that means to you.
absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, whether depending on where you're at the position that this could be something you could consider.
Okay. So this topic was suggested by a listener, so hopefully this is helpful. The subject article is from Realtor.com, written by Melinda Sinneris. I hope I got that right. Thanks, or Melinda, excuse me, Melinda Sinneris. Thanks, Melinda. Hope you enjoy this. So again, Janice, can you take us away on should snowbirds rent or buy their second home and how to decide?
Absolutely. So this article is great. It breaks it down into three times snowbirds should rent and then three times snowbirds should buy when the right time is. So first off is three times snowbirds should rent. For example, the first example would be it's your first time flying south. Well, this applies, I would think, to anywhere. If it's your first time going there, you may want to look around. You may want to get to know the area. It's all about the location. You don't want to see something online and think, oh, it's a beautiful house in the woods. It's quiet. And you get there, you realize you're in the middle of a big development. So it may not be the right time to, at first, buy before seeing it, spending a little time there.
I
What do you
mean,
think?
doesn't that feel like common sense? I mean, why would you
Um,
buy something you haven't ever seen or tried before? That's a big sink. I mean, unless you're,
right.
yeah. But that being said, we have friends who I don't know were living in London or abroad, and we're moving to New York, and we're just like, yeah, I'll take that $3 million apartment. Yeah, I don't need to see it.
Well, those are not problems that I can foresee me having in the near future. But I mean, if you have those problems, that's pretty cool, I guess, right? You could probably make those on a whim. But when you're looking at this from a monetary standpoint, you probably don't want to make such a big investment if you're not very familiar with the area.
Right.
The second thing would be you're nervous about the market volatility. So the market's unpredictable. How quickly could you sell if you needed to? If you're going into this and you think you would need to sell quickly, I don't know if that's the right time either. Might be a better choice to rent if you're thinking I got to get out quick. What do you think?
I think that's great advice for almost every type of investment.
Yeah.
Whether it's a stock or an investment property or art or anything else that's not cash, I guess, right?
Right. I mean, you have to think about it. It's not quick to sell a house. I mean, you've talked about that. You wrote a book about it.
Right.
It's not quick.
Yeah, you never want to be a forced seller. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And number three, if you're concerned about upkeep cost. So home ownership, it costs money. It's not just the mortgage. You have to factor everything into it. The taxes. If you're not living there all the time, you're going to have someone take care of it. Maintenance, upkeep. So you are essentially, if you own here or rent here, I say here, but, in the Northeast, you're essentially taking on two homes and two upkeep of those homes.
Yeah, don't minimize that. Because I suspect that if if it's your winter home where you're there only half or less of the time, all that upkeep cost probably will, I guess, annoy you or irk you more than if it was your primary residence, year-round residence.
And it could get expensive. Think about it. You cut the grass down there year round,
Yeah.
and not just once a week. I mean, you cut often, and you have to keep the grounds good. You have to have someone check on it. I mean, there's a lot to factor in um, to make sure that it's just the right choice.
Very good. And moving on, before we move on to whether or instances where snowbirds should buy, you reminded me, thank you, Janice, that this kind of ties into my book, How to Buy Your Perfect First Home. It's that my book is not really about second homes, but a lot of the principles do apply. So do you see a lot of overlap?
Oh, absolutely. And I know you said it's not necessarily for a second home buyer, but for example, when it comes time for maybe us to get a different house down the road, I think it would be very beneficial to read it, even though it's not the first time, but you forget, unless you buy a house every year,
Right.
You totally forget that you have to prepare and just different things. So I actually think it's great for first time and subsequent home buyers.
Great.
So moving on, the author talks about 3 times a snowbird should buy. So if you're in that point in that time of life when you're ready to call someplace home, you have fallen in love with the area, you've gone down there. This is the flip side of what we talked about first. If you've never seen it, well, if you go down all the time and you love this place and you want to call it your home and you're ready, you don't want to keep all your worldly goods in a car and drive them back and forth, then maybe it's time. Love it, you keep going.
That last thing you mentioned is a great litmus test. If you feel like putting a toothbrush there, maybe you should start thinking about buying, right? Or
That's
toiletries.
a great, exactly. Yeah. You want to leave your stuff and just have it there. That's you. You want that to be your home, right? And then thinking a little more broad would be thinking about your legacy. So leaving the home to your family, there's a lot of people that leave, correct me if I'm wrong, but their shore houses, their, Florida houses to their family when they leave as part of their legacy. And it's also how traditions get started. They go to the shore. So there's a bigger picture too.
Yeah, a lot of folks like to start creating that sort of family tradition, maybe, of going to the, like you said, shore house or, down to Florida in the winters. And it's not just about owning an asset, but rather creating something an experience, I guess, that can be passed on from generation to generation.
Absolutely. So you're not only the piece of property, but everything that goes with it and the traditions. Yeah. And then lastly, you're able to qualify. That's a big one. You probably can't start this. Well, we both know, and you've talked about in your book, you can't start this process until you know you can qualify. Because buying a home, there's financials involved with it. And you should know that you're in a financial place that you can carry the mortgage and everything we talked about before, the home ownership that goes with it. You should be in a good spot. And if you're able to, it might be a great time.
Yeah, we talk about not buying too much house to the point where it's stressing you out or burdening you. And to me, it would be even sillier to do that for a second home. So make sure it's well within your means. Yeah,
absolutely. Make sure it's something that you can do, and you can do it without burdening yourself. Correct. So while we're talking about this buying of a snowbird property, there's some snowbird home buying advice. So the first step in any home buying process is the pre-approval. Have your finances in order. But this is pretty particular in this case because let's say you just drive down there and you're like, okay, I want to buy a home. Well, that's great. But that's not your main place where you spend all your time. Your financial documents aren't necessarily going to be with you. Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure you have all your ducks in a row, per se, before you fly south, because you will have access to more of your information.
Also, pre-approval, there might be some little local twists. For example, I mean, I know New York City is not where people come for the winter, but I'm just giving an example of a local twist.
Yeah.
The way it works in Manhattan is oftentimes there are certain buildings, like on a building-by-building basis, that banks will or will not lend to, right? So let's say that this building has, I don't know, their financials are not up to the standards of Bank of America, but Chase is okay with them, right? I'm just giving an example. This is the kind of stuff you need to know locally before you start doing all your paperwork and underwriting with one bank, only to find out that that bank doesn't lend for that building. I mean, that would be a huge waste of time on everyone's part. So that's the sort of stuff. I can't think of an example off the top of my head for Florida, Arizona, or what have you, but there may very well be circumstances like that.
Well, there are a lot of the down there, the retirement condominiums and they're almost like its own town in and of itself. So there may be differences when it comes to that with the pre-approval, taking it all into consideration.
Sure.
But yeah, just start looking into it before you go. And you're not down there that long, really. The Snowbird, oh, I wish I had the numbers, but I think it's really in like the cold part. So you're not there for more than, what would you say, a few months?
2-3 months max, yeah.
Yeah. So if you take care of this before you go down, you're way ahead of the game. And just as importantly, finding the right real estate agent. So there are lots of great real estate agents in Florida that specialize in snowbird properties. As you can imagine, a lot of people do this, and that's not necessarily that any of the real estate agents couldn't handle it, but there are specialties.
I mean, that's so important. If it's not your neighborhood, there's so many things you might miss, overlook, or just not know about. You might not even know to ask about. And a great broker will really guide you through that process, especially if you are a snowbird and they're familiar with the needs and questions and wants of snowbirds. They can probably answer questions you didn't even think to ask. So yeah, a really great agent can be a real ace in the hole.
Absolutely. And they will be able to answer questions. For example, the last part here is to check if you can rent it out when you're not there. I mean, we've talked about, shore homes. Those rent, depending on where you are, but it might be different where you're going in Florida. It might be in a condominium or a retirement community where you can't rent. So you have to factor all that in. And if you were trying to look at the rent as an income factor for you, but you buy a house that you can't rent, that's going to be a problem. So you're going to want to look at all that, but if you have the right real estate agent, they'll guide you through that.
Yeah, and also look into whether or not there's management companies, or I think in some areas condos actually manage that for you. There's a lot of moving parts involved when you're letting other folks live. I guess maybe not these days because of Airbnb and whatnot, but just make sure it's going to work out the way you'd like it to.
Right. Make sure it's and you also look at the homeowners. Some homeowners associations, they don't allow rentals. So it's definitely want to take all into consideration, and a good real estate agent can help you.
Okay. So to the listener who asked for this, I hope we've covered this topic well. Snowbird or wannabe snowbirds. So thank you again to Realtor.com. Thank you, Melinda. And we'll talk again next time. Thanks, Janice.
We'll talk soon.
Bye now.